welcome. It's been nearly 4 years since President Obama ordered the prison camps at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to be closed within 12 months. It did not happen. Fearing terrorism or public opinion, Congress would not pay to bring prisoners to the United States, and other nations were slow to take them when the U.S. wouldn't, something we learned from diplomatic cables released by WikiLeaks. So, after a decade, Gitmo has fewer prisoners, but is still with us. But somehow, the central moral issue of the last presidential campaign is near absent in this one. We'll explore why in a minute. Also on the agenda today, a cultural anthropologist gives us insight into the Taliban. Plus, we'll hear why the Senate is examining information brokers who market your internet habits. And we recognize a milestone, a local 1970s incubator for documentary filmmakers still zooming after all these years. First, Guantanamo. Pre-trial hearings began this week for the alleged mastermind of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and 4 others. Our guest will bring us up to date on the legal developments and the prison that never closed. Joining us, Ramzi Kassem, Associate Professor of Law here at the City University. He has represented past and current prisoners at Guantanamo and directs the Immigrant and Refugee Rights Clinic here in New York. With us as well, lawyer Erin Herro, part of that effort, who has also seen Gitmo up close. And with us via Skype from London, Andy Worthington, investigative journalist and author of the Gitmo Files. Welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. Ramzi, what was the controversy this week at the beginning of the trial about delaying audio? Do you understand that?
Yeah, it's actually nothing new in the sense that as long as the military commissions have been running, these 40-second audio delays have been a part of the trials of the so-called high-value detainees, a group that includes men like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind of 9/11. And so when you look at the earlier iterations of the military commissions, they had those 40-second delays in place, and it's effectively a censorship mechanism that enables the government to shut down the audio so that observers and members of the audience don't hear supposedly classified information that's being said by the prisoners having to do with their abuse in U.S. custody.
Including, Erin, even the families of the 9/11 victims who get to watch and listen in, right?
Yeah.
And what are they afraid that people are going to hear that might be said?
Honestly, I don't know. I assume that it has to do with the torture techniques. I read the ACLU motion and brief on that today, and I think it's very convincing, though in the past the military commissions hasn't shown to be very receptive to those sorts of arguments. So I mean, we'll see how.
So any statements about or allegations of torture being used on these prisoners, like we know Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was waterboarded, Dick Cheney said so.
Yeah.
But they don't want that discussed in public.
Yeah, I suppose the details of the way that that goes, how the prisoners feel about it, they don't want anyone to know about, despite the fact that we all know it happened.
Andy, in London, would you tell us why other countries would not take any of these prisoners from Gitmo? As I said in the introduction, members of Congress didn't want to move them to prisons on the U.S. mainland, either for fear of terrorism or fear of political backlash. What about some other countries, countries that some of the prisoners were actually from, for example?
Well, you know, in most cases, when prisoners could be returned, then they were. What happened was that in countries where they couldn't be returned, then obviously other countries had to be asked to help. And the problem was that the United States refused to help. That was the first big obstacle. No prisoner was allowed to settle in the United States who couldn't safely be returned to their home countries. The Uyghurs from China were the best example of that. But the United States refused. Every branch of the government refused to allow any former Guantanamo prisoners to be rehoused in the US. But other countries did come on board. I mean, actually, between 1 and 2 dozen other countries took nearly 40 prisoners who had no connection to their countries, gave them homes. I mean, that's, I think, a big gesture. And of course, it's panned out in a very interesting manner as to what exactly is the status of these people. It's a long story that will go on, but I think what happened was that eventually this kind of well of goodwill dried up, and there have been no resettlements in the last couple of years, apart from two of the Uyghurs, the Chinese men, who were resettled in El Salvador earlier this year.
Right.
And this reality is a self-inflicted wound on the Obama administration's part in at least two ways. First, as Andy alluded to, the Obama administration refused to accept Chinese Muslims who had been acknowledged by the U.S. government to have never formed part of any adverse entity. They refused to accept them into the United States, even though their attorneys had set up support structures for them, jobs, cars, in Chinese Muslim communities in Virginia and Florida. When that happened, other countries said, well, okay, Guantanamo is a U.S.-made problem. If you're not going to do anything to solve it, why should we step up to the plate?
Right. Although, Erin, it's not like nobody's left Gitmo compared to when it was open. I think originally there were 700 prisoners there, and now there's 100 something. Is that about right?
It's about 166, according to the New York Times estimate on their website.
So who's gone and who's still there?
It's, according again to the New York Times estimate, it's mostly Yemenis who can't be resettled. And they also separate Afghanis and Pakistanis and Saudis. Then there's a handful of other Arabs and people from other countries.
Look, the sad truth about Guantanamo is that the single most important determinant of whether you remain at Guantanamo or you are released is your nationality. And when you look at the statistics, the roughly 800 people who were there at its height in 2003, the 166 who are left today in 2012, you'll notice that there's a distribution by nationality. If you came from a country that was influential with the United States, like the United Kingdom, you were likelier to be released earlier on. If you came from a country that is less influential, like Yemen or Afghanistan, you will remain at Guantanamo, and it's ultimately all about international geopolitics.
Although, Andy, I've heard another theory by people more supportive of how this is being handled, and that is that those left are kind of the worst of the worst, which is why nobody wants them.
Well, that would be terrible if that's actually being touted as a piece of reliable information. I mean, the truth is that of the 166 men who are held there, 86 of them have been approved for transfer out of Guantanamo by the administration itself. And over half of those were initially approved for transfer out of Guantanamo by military review boards under the Bush administration. So this has been going on since 2004, that over half of the men who are still held have actually been told at various times over the last 8 years, we don't want to hold you anymore. But as Ramzi pointed out, the problem for most of these men is that they're Yemenis. And when you're a Yemeni in Guantanamo, you are condemned through your nationality to remain in Guantanamo, very possibly for the rest of your lives. As we found out, and very sadly at the start of September, with a man who was repeatedly approved for transfer from Guantanamo, who died in the prison. Let's stop pretending in the United States that there is anything about Guantanamo that is different from the worst kind of prisons run by totalitarian regimes, except the thing that makes Guantanamo even worse, which is that the successive US governments claim to have policies whereby they approve people for transfer, and yet in the cases of Yemenis and some other people, it makes no difference. You do not get released. Why bother saying?
And this isn't hypothetical. One of our clients in the CUNY clinic, Shakir Amir, is a Saudi national, former UK resident. He's been at Guantanamo for over 10 years. He has been approved for release from Guantanamo by 2 successive US presidents, President Bush's administration and President Obama's administration, and he remains there. The UK government is saying that they want him back, yet he remains. And he's not the only one. As Andy was pointing out, there are many more.
But released to what? Many Americans may think, well, yeah, sure, Yemen, Afghanistan, these are the 2 places you don't want suspected terrorists to go because these are the active locations of terrorist cells.
Well, my client, Shakir Amir's case, it's being released back to his home and back to his family in the United Kingdom. But we do represent Yemeni prisoners as well. And yes, they should be sent back home to their families and their homes in Yemen. These men should be presumed innocent. They have not been charged with anything. They have not been found guilty of anything. So they shouldn't be presumed to be terrorists who are going to return to a fight that they never participated in to begin with.
Andy, go ahead.
And the government has basically, through these decisions that it doesn't want to carry on holding them, has said, We do not regard these people as a threat to the United States. So release them. You know, I mean, there's no argument for carrying on holding people when you have said that you're going to release them. Nobody's saying release all the Yemenis. There are Yemenis that are in Guantanamo who the government says it wants to put forward for trial. Well, please go ahead. Put these people on trial, but don't carry on holding people that you said you don't want to hold, because that makes a mockery of the whole pretense that there is anything resembling justice going on at Guantanamo. And that's, I think, the most disturbing aspect of it, is claiming that what is in place has some notion of fairness and justice to it, and then refusing to actually make that become real by refusing to let anybody out of the place.
So we have a presidential race going on, Erin, and this doesn't seem to be much of an issue. It was a big issue when President Obama ran in 2008. He did not close Guantanamo Bay for some of the reasons that we've discussed, and maybe some others. And Romney, if anything, has said he might open a second Gitmo. I'm not sure what he meant by that. So how do you see the place of this issue in the presidential campaign?
Well, it clearly hasn't had much of one. If you look at both of their websites, Guantanamo has no place on either website. I think, for one thing, for obvious reasons, the economy has taken precedent over everything. I think one of those reasons is that the American public doesn't see these people as, I don't know, they've been dehumanized to a certain extent. For another reason, the Obama campaign, I don't think, wants to draw attention to the fact that he hasn't closed the prison. I really don't think he wants to draw attention to the fact that he hasn't closed the prison. For one thing, because he came in claiming that he was going to be the hope and change president. And he's taken a lot of flack from that, from the Romney campaign, regardless of the fact that I don't think the Romney campaign has done a good job on a lot of issues proposing different solutions to problems, and I don't think that necessarily he has proposed an alternative. I think that that's a large portion of it, and also the fact that I don't think Obama wants to draw attention again or remind people of the media disaster that was the trying to try Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other 9/11 trying to try them.
But you know, the one thing, I mean, this goes back to sort of another of the Obama administration's major self-inflicted wounds. Nearly 4 years ago, they announced that they would close Guantanamo, but then they set a one-year deadline. Now, the Bush administration set up Guantanamo in a much shorter period of time, and it did so without congressional approval. By setting a one-year deadline, the Obama administration left room for the opposition to mobilize effectively. And we are where we are as a direct result of that.
So, Andy, do you see the Obama record as having been one of the genuine intent to close Guantanamo and being blocked by Congress? Or do you see him as having kind of changed his own mind along the way for whatever reason?
Well, you know, there's a few things. I mean, it's certainly, you know, as Ramzi says, it's a self-inflicted wound. I mean, he shouldn't have made promises that he was going to find difficult to keep. If he'd meant it, what should have happened almost immediately in January 2009 was that the 65 or 66, something like that, prisoners who had been approved for transfer out of Guantanamo by President Bush, but who were still held, many of them Yemenis, should all have been put on a plane and sent home. Now, you know, that didn't happen. Nothing happened. And the next thing that we heard really was 4 months later, when obviously there had been mobilization, and particularly from within the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies. President Obama had released some of the notorious torture memos. One of the Bybee memos written by John Yoo, and 3 other memos written by Bradbury, who was in the same position as Yoo and Bybee in the Justice Department, kind of reapproving torture in 2005. And this caused, you know, huge consternation in the intelligence agencies. Republicans hated him for doing it, for being transparent, for opening up, for saying, you know, we're not going to use torture. Here's evidence of what used to happen. There was a huge pushback internally from these organizations, these people. And by May 2009, Obama had kind of capitulated on what it meant to promise to close Guantanamo. And he started saying, no, actually, there are some people that we're going to have to hold, even though we haven't got the evidence to hold them. Yeah, we want to have federal court trials, but we're going to have military commissions as well. Everything really that from the Bush years started coming back on the table.
But the other dimension of this is that any time we reached a decision point with the Obama administration on these issues, it became very clear that President Obama did not want to expend his political capital on these issues. And so he was just not going to go to bat on any of these issues, be it forcing the closure of Guantanamo. And it's interesting that you mentioned earlier, Governor Romney's promise to open a second Guantanamo, because my students and I believe that that second Guantanamo already exists. We represent prisoners in the prison that we refer to as Guantanamo's larger evil twin at Bagram in Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan.
And
so this trial began this week, the pretrial motions in the KSM case. I hear it might be like another year before the trial proper actually gets started. Is that what you expect, Erin?
I'm not sure we know of a timeline. I've asked Ramzi about this, and I have no idea.
We're just about out of time. What's your best understanding?
I ask him these questions.
It's going to be like any capital trial. Any good defense team, any lawyer worth their salt is going to delay to save their client's life.
Capital trial. He could be executed. At the end of this.
The charges are capital.
I would say, the prosecution doesn't really want to go ahead with this because they've got a desperately hard job trying to hide the evidence of torture. The defense teams don't want to go ahead because they don't want a rigged system where they're not allowed to discuss the use of torture. I don't think anybody really wants these trials to go ahead, and I think that it will, on both sides, it will be a long, drawn-out process. The problem is that President Bush broke so many laws in the first place that you shouldn't break, that it's left us in a position where justice is extremely difficult to achieve.
I agree only in part.
And we're out of time. You agree? Okay, that's intriguing, but do it in 15 seconds.
I'll do it in 15 seconds. Having been across the aisle from those prosecutors, I very much believe that they want to move forward and they want to have these men executed.
Thank you, and thank you in London. Thank you all very much. Up next, an anthropologist explains the Taliban. Last week, the Taliban shot a 14-year-old girl on a school bus for, as they put it, promoting secularism. Translation, she was getting an education. Malala Yousafzai from the Swat Valley in Pakistan came to prominence at age 11 when she started writing a diary for the BBC about life under the Taliban. She wants to become a doctor. Monday, she was flown to a trauma center in England with a serious head wound. Stories like this leave us angry and confused. It is America's longest war, but again we ask, who exactly is this enemy we are fighting? Are we continuing to make fatal mistakes because we don't understand Afghan culture or history or politics? Does our exit strategy make sense? Joining us via Skype from Boston, a foremost authority on the region, Thomas Barfield, anthropologist at Boston University, author of Afghanistan, A Cultural and Political History. Thank you so much for joining us. Hello from New York.
Thank you.
I often hear the Taliban referred to as medieval, which is really a European concept. Is that word a good analogy for us here in America to understand the Taliban or to begin to?
Well, it creates a problem in terms of understanding because what we consider medieval is particularly backward, but it is accurate in one sense. The Taliban represent a religious movement within a society where religion is absolutely the most important thing. And certainly in medieval Europe, religion played a similar role, which does not play in the modern world in the West today.
Why is the idea of girls getting an education so threatening to or objectionable to the Taliban leaders?
The Taliban leaders really represent sort of an old form of patriarchy in which they think men should run societies and that they should deal with the public world and that women should stay within the private realm for which education is not necessary. It represents a view of the world that's considered old-fashioned even in Afghanistan. But the Afghan Taliban see themselves as protectors of old values that actually a new generation in Afghanistan does not feel is very relevant to life in the 21st century.
You said seen as backward even in Afghanistan. Is it possible to put percentages, like from a public opinion poll, on what percentage of Afghans and which ones actually support that kind of view?
It tends to be a rural view found in the east and south. But if you want to take a good look at probably average views in Afghanistan, more than 8 million young Afghans go to elementary school, and quite a large percentage of them are girls. Particularly at the elementary level, there's, even in rural areas, a large belief that girls should at least go to elementary school.
So is this kind of an urban versus rural cultural divide? We have things, not to this extreme, but we have things like this in our own country. Is it urban versus rural?
For the past 70 or 80 years, it has been. That is, the rural areas representing conservatism and the urban areas representing sort of progressivism. And that's caused a couple of civil wars in Afghanistan. But I would say that even in rural areas, most rural areas are not as conservative as sort of Taliban hardliners are. They really see the importance of having both boys and girls educated up to a certain level. The real issue in the rural areas tends to come up in later grades, going to high school or university. But in terms of elementary education, I believe even in rural areas, it's believed that both boys and girls should receive a basic education.
And in those rural areas where high school or higher education might be controversial, do women there take this view too? And if so, why?
Well, women want to see their daughters empowered. Also, just in terms of rural areas, you have to realize it's a country of arranged marriages. And to some extent, as the boys get educated, they don't want to have illiterate wives. So there's actually sort of an internal demand that women receive some education, partially because the rising generation feels that that's necessary.
Can a central government run from Kabul, the capital, ever consolidate the country culturally in this respect? There have been various attempts at central government of Afghanistan going back a century or more, sometimes imposed by imperialist powers, but always failures, right?
Well, they've generally failed because they've overreached. There was a central government in Kabul for 50 years, from 1929 to 1978, that declared itself to be all-powerful. It had a constitution very similar to today's constitution, a king that was ruling it. Kabul made all the rules, but they were sort of smart enough to have one policy for the cities and the major population areas and another policy for the rural areas. That is, they would make one set of laws that were rather progressive, but they essentially implemented them in places where they knew these laws would be well received. And over time, they thought they would spread to the countryside, but they were much more patient than, for example, the communists were, or a reforming emir in the 1920s who attempted to do this in a rapid fashion. It's really, in some senses, not unusual, even in the United States, to have laws that are aspirational and have some realities about what's actually possible to do at any given time.
So do you think the United States made a mistake when this war started back in 2001, trying to aim for a central government and promoting Hamid Karzai, you know, the leader in the Cape, and the whole thing? Could there have been another way to go about it that would have still fulfilled our basic military goal of rooting out the Al-Qaeda strongholds, but had a better chance of success of having a cultural change take root in Afghanistan?
Well, the United States had no policy when it invaded Afghanistan on what kind of government the Afghans should have in terms of details about it. The Afghan interlocutors that we worked with were pressing for a central government that was highly centralized because that's what they wanted. And they pointed to older constitutions written by the king that said, well, this is Afghan tradition. And the United States, when dealing with foreign governments, tends to like one-stop shopping. The United States has the oldest federal constitution in the world, which devolves power to states and localities. But in our dealings with foreign countries, we tend to prefer autocratic, centralized governments, in part because we think they'll be more stable. In a place like Afghanistan, they tend to be unstable. But yes, it would be possible to have a more stable Afghanistan by devolving power, at least to handle their local affairs their own way.
We only have about a minute left. I'm curious what you think about the exit strategy that's been announced by the Obama administration toward 2014. Do you think it threatens to give the Taliban more power and more power over the lives of more girls? Or what in general do you think of that exit strategy, including the fact that some of the timetable has been pre-announced?
Well, there really is no exit strategy that's been announced for domestic purposes, and Vice President Biden mentioned this in the debates, that we're getting out. We'll be out by 2014. But talking to the Afghans, the Americans say, we'll leave behind 10 or 15,000 troops in Afghanistan to make sure the Taliban can't take over. So there's some confusion both in Afghanistan and the United States on what exactly the end game for Afghanistan and the United States is at the moment.
But we were up to 100,000 at the peak, so 10 to 15,000 must look to many Afghans who want protection like abandonment, no?
No, because the Soviets completely abandoned them, or at least their allies. They pulled out every troop and gave no air power. The United States have at least 10 to 15,000 troops plus its air power behind. That effectively makes it impossible for the Taliban to take Kabul or any of the major cities because they'll be unable to go conventional. The Taliban, to win a war and take over, need an absolute withdrawal of all foreign military direct support and aid.
Huh. So the war goes on past 2014 in one respect or another. Real quick, do you expect Romney to be any different from Obama on this if elected?
Romney talks tougher, but my guess is that he'll be no different and perhaps even less interested in carrying out the war in Afghanistan than Obama is.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Up next, the Senate demands information on the information brokers. Concerned that an unprecedented amount of personal, medical, and financial information about all of us is being collected online and sold for profit, a Senate committee has decided to search for abuses of our privacy by information brokers. Senator John D. Rockefeller, Democrat of West Virginia, has opened an extensive investigation of 9 such brokers who may know more about you than you realize. How significant is the Senate probe? How serious is the problem? Joining us via Skype from San Francisco, Rainey Reitman, Activism Director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Thanks very much for coming on our program. Hello from New York.
Hi there. Hello from San Francisco.
I think it's no shock to anybody watching that people collect information about us online. What's new that a U.S. Senator is getting into the act?
Well, I think what's particularly interesting here is not merely they're collecting information about us online, but that we're really starting to see the breadth of data that's getting collected and hopefully starting to shed a little bit of public awareness about just how widespread this problem is. As you may know, a lot of these data brokers are culling information from public records. They actually send people into courthouses to take down information and then upload it onto the internet so that whenever you have a public transaction in a courtroom, whether you're in a divorce proceedings or whether you're having something regarding your house, perhaps real estate related, it will then end up in these data broker databases without you ever necessarily realizing it. And then that kind of information is also being combined with increasingly online data, like data about our social networking profiles.
And if this is public information in the sense that a divorce or a home purchase may have gone through a court and become officially public information, and somebody uses it, do we have a right to object?
Well, so that's exactly the problem here, is that laws don't really prevent this sort of thing from happening. So historically, all of this data was sort of tricky to get to. You'd have to go to quite a bit of effort to go down to a courtroom to look this sort of information up. However, nowadays, with so many information brokers trading in this valuable data about individual consumers, often in large scale for marketing purposes or campaign purposes or what have you, there's this sort of new issue around the fact that the privacy by obscurity that we relied on when we were an analog world doesn't really work in today's more digital world.
Well, who's really getting harmed by this? Anybody in the real world? Is this just a hypothetical concern, a theoretical concern, Or can you tell me any stories of people who've been harmed by having data about themselves based on their online purchases or what they've done in court that's public information or whatever, being bought and sold regarding them?
Sure. Well, I actually have had the opportunity to talk to a number of people who have contacted me over concerns about this issue, particularly when I worked for an organization called the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse, which has done a lot of work around information brokers. And often one of the things that we found was that victims of stalking and domestic violence were very concerned about having their address publicly available online. We had cops and judges who were concerned about having their information online. I was contacted by an undercover agent at one point, an undercover cop who wanted to make sure their data wasn't publicly available online, or even teachers, people like that. And there's this real need for a lot of these people in these vulnerable situations who want to protect themselves to make sure that somebody searching their name can't run into information about where they live and other data about that sort of thing. And often these individuals will contact the companies in question and say, would you please take down my information? I'm concerned about it. And sometimes the companies will, and sometimes the companies won't, and sometimes the companies don't respond, and sometimes they take it down only to have it back up on the website a few months later.
So what can the U.S. Senate do about this?
Well, I think the U.S. Senate is doing the most effective thing it can at this particular moment, which is getting down and getting some real facts about what kind of data these companies are gathering, exactly where it's coming from, who it's getting sold to. I mean, at this point, we're talking about an industry that is shrouded in secrecy. They have gone to great lengths to obscure, the details about all the data they're getting and who it goes to. So starting by finding out a little bit more about the problem, I think, is the first step.
Is a good example of any of this Facebook's relationship with the company Datalogics, or is that something else?
Well, that's an interesting question. So Datalogics is a company that relies on data gathered about your supermarket purchases. So when you go to, say, Safeway or what have you, and you sign up for a loyalty card and they begin tracking data about your purchases, Datalogics is a company that would convert that data into information that can be used for marketing purposes. Facebook has recently started a contract with Datalogics so that they can use the Datalogics database to find out whether or not people who see a particular advertisement on Facebook are more likely to then go out in the real world and actually purchase that object at a supermarket. And this made a lot of people uncomfortable when they heard about it, and we saw a ton of news coverage, so for certain. And this is something that might be legislated out of existence, and we've got about 30 seconds left. So I think the most important first step would be to do what the Federal Trade Commission asked. Make sure that there is a single hub website where people can go and see all these information brokers and give them a simple way to opt out of that, of having their data collected by them. That would be a truly remarkable step if the Senate wanted to go there.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, downtown community television still zooming in after all these years. It started out with a simple yet ambitious goal way back in the 1970s, long before YouTube, to use the power of video to affect social change. 40 years later, downtown community TV is still thriving, providing affordable training and equipment to emerging documentary filmmakers. And DCTV, as it's known, has expanded its mission to include free workshops where low-income students can learn the craft. And last week, after sending out this video invitation, DCTV celebrated its 40th anniversary at its headquarters on Lafayette Street, announcing they would open a theater just for documentaries. Filmmaker and co-founder of DCTV, John Albert, claims to have recovered from that star-studded bash. So has Jasmine Barkley. She is a graduate of the filmmaking workshops at Downtown Community TV. Welcome to both of you. Hello.
Thank you.
And John, talk about the evolution of this over 40 years? For one thing, the technology is so different.
Yeah, we come from the Stone Age. You remember those good old days with black and white porta-packs that couldn't see in the dark, that we used to call them spaghetti makers, because you'd be filming and you look down, all of a sudden you'd see a pile of tape coming out of the machines. You couldn't edit. Things that we take for granted today were things that we just had wrestling matches year after year with, but there was such an excitement with these cameras. People could see themselves on TV for the first time. Folks like me had never been on TV. People like Jasmine had never been on, we would play the tapes on the street corners from a mail truck. I got a mail truck for $5 and put black and white TV sets in the side of it. And that's how we got our programs to the people. We played them on the street.
Jasmine, tell us a little bit of how you got involved with DCTV.
Well, I started off with the summer youth program last summer. Basically, I went to the job placement site for the summer youth program, and they said they had either two options, whether to work in a daycare or to go to DCTV. And I asked the lady, I said, what's DCTV? And she explained it as a studio of some sort. And I just figured because it had TV in it, I thought I was going to be on TV. So I said, sign me up.
It's either that or daycare.
Yeah.
That's a heck of a choice.
Yeah.
That's right. Be a star or change diapers, right?
Yeah.
So put that experience in the context of the larger organization for us.
Well, we started the youth training programs in 1978. There was a budget crisis similar to the one we're going through right now. And one of the first things they cut were all the elective programs in the school. So kids like Jasmine didn't have music, didn't have drama, didn't have anything. And we thought it wasn't fair. I'd gone to high school, and those were the best things of going to high school. We hated French class, we hated math class. We liked band, we liked gym. And we thought that it was only fair that young people like Jasmine have these type of opportunities. So we began teaching in 1978, and now we have 250 high school kids in our program. And in the advanced program like Jasmine, it's, I think 100% of your class went to college.
Yes, yes.
And almost all of them got really nice scholarships.
So let's show some video clips. And the first thing we're going to see is about a 3-minute montage of historical video from things that DCTV has done. And then we're going to see a little bit of Jasmine's work after that. But 3 minutes of DCTV through the ages.
Yeah. What do you have to say about this contract? Well, when Lincoln freed the slaves, he forgot all about the cab drivers of the city of New York.
I do this for only 12 cents, but I saw this in Uptown. It sells for about $13, and I think it is unfair.
Unfortunately, we've made human life a commodity. We've tend to always sell it in some way or fashion, and now we're selling health care. And maybe somebody's going to be hurt, but we're not going to look at it.
This window here is always dirty. You got to make it look nice. You got to make it look nice, otherwise it don't pay off, see?
This is my life. We never had a vacation in our life. Never. Where's the money? Where's the customers?
And you're always wearing your bulletproof vest. No. No. We haven't got it.
It's upside down!
And for you, get the heart.
When they shut this factory, where'd they go?
They moved to Mexicali in Mexico.
Hey, Mexicali! We're going into Mexico, baby. When you blow your nose, you get the gray stuff come out of your nose.
See, what's that mean, Frank?
It means the dust is getting in their lungs.
And what's going to happen to them?
Some of them are going to get sick.
What can you say that's going to make me understand this? What you going to tell yourself, your baby, in the future?
I can't even understand it myself. How can I make anybody understand if I can't understand it?
excerpts from DCTV documentaries from 1972 to 1993. The program's still going now, 20 years later. Whatever happened to that girl at Rikers? Any idea?
I don't know what happened to her, but we're in touch with lots of people from our documentaries. I feel like my life is flashing in front of my eyes because I was on your radio show talking about a lot of these programs when they were coming on the air. But, you know, we had very limited goals when we started this. We thought we wanted to change the world.
That's a limited goal.
Limited goal. And some of these programs actually were quite effective. The healthcare documentary caused tremendous controversy. The programs in Vietnam were the first look at Vietnam after the war. But you can see I've aged. I'm not the same guy that was eating that snake heart, and we need young blood. And Jasmine is the next generation of people who, at least if we didn't change the world, we're handing the torch to them.
Do you know the legacy, or did you, when you got involved, did they teach you their legacy? Did they teach you their political orientation?
Yeah, they basically said that they make documentary films primarily, but they said that we were free to, you know, make other things, but they told us about the history of the firehouse and the history of the program.
The firehouse where it's housed.
Yes.
And we forced Jasmine and the other students to do one thing, the final project, and it's something that's a little bit uncomfortable for them. What do you have to do?
We have to make an autobiography piece.
So we're going to set up a clip of your autobiographical piece. Do you want to say anything about this for the viewers before we see it?
Basically, what they're going to see is me writing a letter to my dad, who is incarcerated, telling him about some of the things that has been going on in my life since he's been gone.
Jasmine's autobiographical DCTV video.
I live in a city of over 8 million people. But just like those 8 million people come and go, that's exactly what people have done to me all my life. Sometimes I try to reach out to my mother, but she doesn't want anything to do with me. I don't know why I keep trying. My dad always told me that I was a wanted child, but I guess that was only on his part. It's disappointing, but I've learned to live without her. Dear Dad, I know that I have not been the best daughter to you for the past few years that you have been gone. Please understand that the past few years have been hard on me. I just find it easier to deal with you being gone by not keeping in contact with you. It's not that I don't think about you, because I do, every single day. It just saddens me to know that you're so far. Although these times have been tough, some good has also come out of you being gone. For one, I have learned how to be independent. I have this job now working making films. Filmmaking has become a love for me. I also have gotten into basketball, which has also become a love for me. I hope that you are not mad at me for not being there for you, but it's my way of dealing. So when you think of the effects of you being gone, don't think of them as being all bad, because they just simply aren't. Sincerely, your daughter, Jasmine.
Well, that was very personal. How do you feel seeing it screened for other people?
I feel like it should be a story of inspiration, and I'm glad to be an inspiration to other people that might be going through something similar to my situation.
Because there are enough people like that.
Yes, yes.
Did you send it to your dad? Were you able to, or did you choose to?
No, I can't. I'm not sure if I can send it to him, but I will show it to him when he comes home.
Yeah. Put this experience in perspective or in the context of your mission to change the world? I mean, seeing the killing fields in Cambodia up there, seeing the taxi drivers strike, all these things, those are kind of big social change kind of issues. Jasmine's telling her personal story about her relationship with her dad and surviving in the face of family trials. What's the relationship between the two kinds of things?
I think there's two things. First of all, Jasmine, it would be great if her story was isolated, but there is a big crack in the social system for kids whose parents aren't around. There's a one solution hole for that, and stick them in foster care. And the foster care experience for Jasmine has been horrific, and she's doing everything she can to avoid it. There's no secret. I mean, she's homeless right now, and it's something that we never had to go through. But it's not fair. And when you have somebody like Jasmine who's determined not to let it stop them, if we can do anything to give them the tools, we've done everything to make our world a better place. And that's sort of what we want to do. If we're calling attention to people starving in Cambodia, or we're calling attention to injustice here, I don't think it makes that much difference if it's big or little, as long as we can do something about it. And the camera and the media, your radio show does that too. Every day, you're trying to make the world a better place. It's the same thing.
Do you use that word, apply it to yourself, homeless?
I don't actually like to use that word because I think of, like, we're located across the street from a shelter, and I think about, you know, those people that are, you know, standing in the line waiting to go in there. And I kind of feel a little bit more fortunate that I'm not on those lines, you know.
Because you're sort of crashing with friends and relatives?
Yes, you know, I've been all over for the past 3 years.
And you're in college, I understand.
Yes, I'm a freshman.
At?
Medgar Evers College.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Do you know what you want to do professionally?
In the long run, I would like to be a corporate lawyer. So that's my goal.
That's a long way.
Yes,
from where
I
you
know.
started out.
Oh.
And the filmmaking, does that become a hobby?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about minoring in it, but I'm not too sure because the classes for business, I'm doing business administration and film, they don't actually cross anywhere. So I would literally have to take the film classes and that. So I'm still considering it.
Why a corporate lawyer? You might be fighting against the people who John is filming in The Next Generation to better the world.
Well, I mean, I always like Law and Order and stuff, but I don't see myself working with like criminals. I don't really want to work with celebrities that much because, you know, you're in the limelight too much. Like, I want to be kind of behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times companies, they're supposed to be for the people, but, you know, when you get deeper into the company, they're really against the people, and I don't think that's right. So I feel like it's my calling.
So you want to be an anti-corporate lawyer?
From the inside.
You want to work for the New York State Attorney General's office and break up the banks who abuse people who wanted who were taking advantage of getting mortgages, right? That kind of thing. You have a theater in the works, an all-documentary theater.
All documentaries all the time. It's not going to be very big. It's going to have 73 seats. The 74th seat tripled the price of the theater, thanks to the New York City building codes. But we're going to make it an interactive theater so that we'll stream all the films, stream the discussions with the directors, be able to take your mother living in Queens, where's your mom live? You know, she'll be able to watch this.
You got it.
Okay.
Still living in Queens.
Okay, and be able to comment on your documentaries, and we'll be able to see it. So we're trying to increase the global community of people who are watching and talking about documentaries.
So do you expect to get the mainline first-run documentaries, the kinds that wind up going up for the Best Documentary Oscar, or is it going to be more community-based and produced documentaries, or that whole range?
Well, we'd like everybody fighting to get in there. That would be great. The projection quality is going to be so good that we think that everybody's going to want to have their film shown there. One of the things that we think can be very useful for this theater is independent documentarians who don't have a lot of money can use this to qualify their films for Academy Award consideration. That can be quite costly and difficult to find a theater to do it. And so if we can help the independent community that way too, that'll be something that we'd really like.
When's it going to open? Do you have a projected start date for your projectors, and what's the ticket price going to be?
For you?
Not for me.
Oh, sorry. this is something that we benefit from government funding. We got city, state, and federal funding. That's good, but it also moves very slowly because they're protecting your taxpayer dollars. So the bids are out now. We think groundbreaking is going to be in March, and then it's going to take them a year to build. So sometime a year from March is when we should open our doors.
Jasmine, have you become a fan of other documentaries, professional documentaries? Have you started to watch any?
Yes, actually just before I came here, I was watching Everything is a Remix, and I found it really interesting because, so many things that you watch or hear, you don't, like someone from my generation, we don't realize that this movie is sampling something from the 50s, And yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
How about another one? Got another one?
I like Freakonomics.
Ah.
Because a lot of documentaries, like, I don't want to say this and like contradict the whole DCTV, but I'm not really that big of a fan of documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
They do have a good purpose behind it. I like the whole message behind it and the fact that it's getting a message out, but I don't actually kind of like to watch them. But Freakonomics is like, it made it like interesting, like it was fun. It didn't feel like a documentary to me.
Yeah, you got to get your people to shape up and
That's
make interesting. Of course, that's the challenge. That's why Michael Moore is, so revolutionary, and a number of other documentarians from the current generation, regardless of their political perspective. They make movies that people like to watch as movies, and we have 30 seconds left. Not just the old notion that, oh, here's a dry, A plus B equals C kind of documentary.
Mm-hmm. Our tutor was the streets. We showed our films on the sidewalk. When the people didn't like them, they walked away. And so we learn really fast to think about what people are, you watch their eyes, and you make films that make people want to watch them.
And now you'll be able to do it in your own theater. We look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Good luck. And that's it for our program for this week. We premiere a new show each Wednesday at 7:30. Next week, PTSD, some new approaches. And tune into my daily radio show weekdays at 10 a.m. Tomorrow morning, Latin America and the presidential race. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.